Hello everyone, I want to welcome you all to the webinar. It's Sustaining Preservation Practices for Managing Storage Environments. This is Series 3 of the webinars. This is Best Practices for Data Collection and Analysis. This series made possible, this series of workshops and webinars made possible by the National Endowments for the Humanities Education and Training Grant. This is the third webinar in this series, and it is presented by the Image Permanence Institute. I'm your presenter today. I'm Christopher Cameron, a Sustainable Preservation Specialist with the Image Permanence Institute. Assisting me today will be Angelique Armstrong, the Product Support Technician. If anyone's ever called with issues for your PEMs or your eClimate notebook, Angie has been your main point of contact or your go-to person. Image Permanence Institute, it's a bit of a misleading picture we have here. We're still a bit gray and just finally getting rid of our mounds of snow, but we're coming to you from Rochester, New York. We're getting into our 30th year here at the Image Permanence Institute. We are recognized as the world leader in development and deployment of sustainable practices for preservation of images and cultural property. So, a little bit of technical support and information. Lauren Parrish will be our technical support person for today. If you have any issues, please contact Laura. Her email address is here, as well as a phone number. A few technical issues. Cable internet is preferred. Wireless or dial-up, if you hear me auto-tuned at all during the presentation, that could be one of the reasons. So it's best to use a cable connection. Participants are asked to use your speakers. If for any reason you have issues getting sound from the speakers, using the voice over IP or telephone number below, you can call in and there's the access code for that. If you noticed, we have turned off the raise hands button for this webinar. If you have any questions or just more information, please feel free to use the question box located in the GoToWebinar control panel. Any questions you submit, Angie will be on hand to answer. If it's something she can't answer or would like to hold it to the later in the webinar, she'll pass it along to me. Or if it's a question neither of us is capable of answering at all, we will address it after the webinar. Or if it requires more detail than we can go into here. Just want to do a quick reminder, today's webinar is designed for anyone who may be new to the topic or is just in need of a refresher. If you've sat through our webinars before, some of this may just be old hat to you, or if you're just looking to get a quick refresher, just want to remind everyone that some of this may be a repeat of some things you may have heard before. Going through today's topics, we're going to cover some best uses, some best tools available, collecting the right data from the right locations, roughly where to place your loggers, how many loggers you may need, and learning to use data for collection risk analysis and improve storage conditions. Just quickly going through some graphs and how to read the graphs, things you may be looking for when you look at these graphs. I like to start off with this quote. It's one that Jim used to use a lot. The most effective strategy for museums, libraries, and archives is a proactive approach based on preventative conservation. You know, all too often when I do a lot of projects with Jeremy, we see that there's a lot of museums and libraries that are operating in reactive mode, and unfortunately that reactive mode tends to come at a cost for either the collection or the environment. And sadly enough, there's too many out there who don't seem to take their environment seriously, and really we should, because we can. You know, because shrinking budgets, you're increasing energy costs, they affect us all, whether it's personally or professionally. And this isn't just about sacrificing conditions in the name of saving energy. It's also about, and it's not about major capital expenditures, buying new equipment or anything like that. It's just about incorporating sustainable practices in your mission with the equipment you have available. All right, data collection and analysis. Moving towards sustainable preservation environment, it's a project. There's no end date, there's no timeline. You can't just walk away from it at the end and wash your hands and go on to the next project. You want to think of it as a journey. There's going to be a series of steps along the way. You're going to be creating and maintaining a sustainable preservation environment, and this means continuously reviewing and refining your practices. So why do we collect data? What's this data for? We collect data because it's hard to get anywhere. It's hard to make any changes without data. As Jim is known to say, you cannot manage what you do not measure. And data makes it essential to be able to manage that environment. Monitoring your environment allows you to document conditions as you make changes to your system to determine what changes may be safer for your collection. Monitoring your environment also allows you to test changes for your system. If one approach doesn't work as you expected it to, you simply back off and negotiate a new or different approach. And without this data, you can't see your pre and post conditions. The data allows you to see that firsthand and know if your changes are improving anything. And it's not just about having a logger. It's not just about buying a logger and installing it in a space. I recently talked to a person who was manning a collection who had 3 loggers and had no intention of managing the software. She would pull the data and just look at it and put it back in her computer. It's not a management program. That's essentially just looking at data. There was no intention of manipulating the data or using the data at all. You need to actually make the data worthwhile. You have to have a good analysis, which requires some form of data to analyze the software and a plan for what you're going to do, how you're going to move forward. Because good analysis of data is going to point things out you may not be aware of in your space. It's going to teach you things to look for trends, maybe notice a microclimate. Learn effectors of your climate that you haven't noticed before, how occupancy may play a factor, HVAC, and even your building envelope. And some of this I'll cover when I go over some graphs. But good data collection is not just about, it also helps you get quantify or justify your needs for upgrades for your equipment. If this data that you collect actually proves as a witness, it's a third party to help your environment. If you're pushing and you know that you have a collection that's stored in a space with bad air handling unit and you just need that support, this data can help act as that support. You can go in with a report that you've printed, say, from eClimate Notebook and say, hey, here's the breakdown of the space that we're storing our ceramics in, and here, this proves that it's not operating the way it should. So what are the best tools we should be using? The data collecting can be time consuming. One thing we hear from a lot of people that the reasons they're not collecting data is it's just too much time. And the right tools will help speed it up, but the wrong tools can wind up costing you a little bit more time. One of these tools I like to bring up is the hygrothermograph. It's an excellent tool. It's been around for nearly 200 years. There's a lot of people that still use these, and I'm actually surprised when you realize that the cost of one of these hygrothermographs comes at a cost of probably about 3 quality data loggers, digital data loggers. So they're rather expensive, and they require frequent maintenance, the pens, the papers, calibration, depending if it's not plugged in, and they require batteries. So there's different types of maintenance, and they can be difficult to determine to examine the long-term trends. If I was to ask someone, can you tell me a dew point off a hygrothermograph, you actually have to lay them out and figure it out. And I mean, any trends, or even if you were to try and analyze metrics, are next to impossible, if not hard enough already. They're not compatible with computer software, so other than storing these things digitally, scanning them in, you really have no means of really using them on a computer. And one other thing I like to bring up is human error that plays a factor in this. Jeremy and I were working at a museum, and before we left, the month before while we were getting our data together, I asked for any information they may have. And if you look at this bottom graph, this is unfortunately what they sent to us. It's great. It's great that they're monitoring. However, the flip side to that is that's useless to us. It's just been going round and round and round. So the data that they recorded, by not pulling that off, just tells us, the highs and lows the space experienced. Your data loggers, the 21st century, your information is now stored, analyzed, and organized. They come in wide varieties, whether they're hardwired, Ethernet connected, wireless. Either wireless comes in RFID, RF, Wi-Fi. They're now Bluetooth. They come in just a big sampling of kinds. One of these, the RF and Ethernet connected, we've heard mixed results on the RF. I'll start with those. Some people absolutely love them. Some people have great experiences with them. Other people have issues with them. Only thing I can relate that to could possibly be facility-wise. The people I've talked to have had issues. One organization in general we worked with purchased 2 wireless data loggers to test, and unfortunately couldn't even get the signal to leave their building. It was a 1929 brick structure, and they couldn't even get the signal out of the room. So they wound up keeping a computer in that room to get the wireless to transfer to. But that being said, there are people who use these with great success. They use them high up collections they can't access routinely. They'll use them if they have multitude of display cases in one room and they don't want to continuously disturb the collection. They're an excellent use for that. And again, they come in various models, whether it's various types of mode for the wireless communication, whether it's Wi-Fi, RFID, RF, Bluetooth. The other style, the Ethernet connection, again, they're decent loggers. The unfortunate method of connection is the Ethernet plug. Anyone who's ever had to plug in a conference room has noticed that jack's never usually in the most accessible location. It can sometimes be troublesome. So that does pose a problem, and if you ask IT to move it, it's usually not high on their priority list. And we have run into one instance that I know of where somebody was using an Ethernet connection, Ethernet logger within their space, and they wanted to move the logger deeper into the space, so they had the wire going across the floor. And whether it was for cleaning or moving, somebody had unplugged the logger for the evening. And generally, if these loggers get unplugged from their source, they have a 3 to 4 hour backup. But after they were done, the person never plugged it in, so they wound up 2 or 3 days later realizing that had lost some of that information. So it's one thing to keep in mind. Your standalone data loggers, these are the most popular, most practical styles. Come in a range of brands, prices, styles. We say $100 to $1,000, but I have seen one at a local hobby electronics shop, we'll say, and it was for about $70. And one thing to keep in mind when you look at loggers is you always want to check your calibration and your battery life. And that $70 logger may be great, it may be just within your price range, but when I looked at that calibration, the calibration was plus or minus 3 degrees and plus or minus 5% for relative humidity. So there's a 6-degree temperature gap, which is pretty big, and RH gap that was 10%. So there's one thing you really want to keep in mind. How calibrated are they? What is the quality of the sensors that they use for these units as well? The battery life, that $70 logger, when you looked at it, said it was dependent on the sampling rate that it would last 1 year. And when I really just started looking at it, the sampling rate for, I believe, if you sampled every 5 minutes, lowered the logger lifespan to, I believe it was almost 3 months. So it's important you look at that. 1 year's worth of data collection is going to give you an accurate TWPI for your space. It's going to show you the seasonal changes within your space as well, or how your systems handle seasonal change. So you want to make sure you get that 1 year's worth of data. I'll say it a couple more times, 1 year's worth of data. You also get, depending on these loggers, various methods to get the data to your computer, whether it's USB, you plug them in. And they offer probes. A lot of these offer multitude of all kinds of accoutrements, whether it's a display, lights, alarms, probes, you name it. Another thing to keep in mind when you're looking at loggers is the more of these additions you add to it, whether it's a display or probes or alarms, they affect the battery life. That's one more thing that's going to be working on that battery. So always, again, check your battery life and see, what the time period would be. IPI, we do offer our PEM loggers. I know many of you use them. Many of you know about them. with a 5-point NIST traceable calibration. They're designed for cultural institutions. It uses the USB flash drive, and we use our highly accurate temperature and relative humidity sensors. And it's also compatible with the preservation metrics and the eClimate notebook, which is our next slide, the IPI's eClimate notebook. Again, I know many of you use this software. It's excellent. You use for data storage, risk analysis, your preservation metrics. One of my preferred, or one of the things I like best about eClimate Notebook is using the reporting feature. Nothing helps you prove a case or help you prove your point than that solid data you have in hand, or you can even save to a file later to look at. I'm going to go step into the realm of data collection with just a few best practices and a few ideas. Collecting your appropriate data. Now, light matters, we know that. However, in this talk, in IPI, we focus more on temperature and relative humidity. The temperature and humidity are going to be your primary drivers of decay. They're going to directly relate to the metrics of natural aging, mechanical, biological damage, metal corrosion. And those temperature and relative humidity levels are going to also directly relate to your HVAC and energy use. If you're looking at graphs and it's incredibly dry outside and you're looking at graphs and it's dry inside, you're going to know your system's not humidifying. So that temperature and relative humidity data is going to tell you what your system is and isn't doing. And again, I'll go over some of that when I get to the analysis section. Indoor data is not enough. Why we obtain outdoor data is important. Outdoor data is a crucial part of interpreting why you have the conditions you have indoors. All the air you're breathing right now when you're sitting at your desk or wherever you are, that air eventually came, or at some point came from outside. Even if the system's using 10% outside air, eventually that air is coming inside to where you are. So that outside air becomes your indoor air, and you want to compare what's going on outside to what's going on inside so you can see exactly how your HVAC systems are handling the change, how they handle the seasonal change, what kind of air it's bringing, is it not humidifying. Looking at outdoor data, again, when we get to the graphs, we'll tell you if you know you have humidification and you see it's not coming up, you see if you're looking at the graph that your system's not applying humidification compared to outside air, you'd know that it's not working or if it's not dehumidifying. And those of you who use eClimate Notebook, again, would know there are 1,700 NOAA weather stations, and they're usually the nearest airport. Monitoring continuously. This is important. Get a logger and don't move it. There's absolutely no such thing as too much data. I don't think you'd ever hear me or Jeremy or Jim tell you have too much data in your collection. But you want to be smart about where you put it. Remember, months differ, seasons differ, years differ. You want to get a full year's worth of data out of your collection. So getting that logger, leaving it there. I have my monthly phone call of someone who will call up and say, my TWPI is no good. I've actually had someone who called and told me, hey, my TWPI, which is your time-weighted preservation index, looks terrible. And they had only been logging a month. And I had a call before that with someone who moves their logger every 2 months to a different location. You want to make sure you're keeping those loggers in one location for as long as possible. And the more data you have for that space, again, I brought it up before, but it's going to tell you how it's handling the seasons, how the winter to spring, spring to summer, summer to fall are going to handle, what your system is doing, and it's going to tell you, using that data, you can try and avoid repeat scenarios. I get asked one question, or a couple questions quite a bit, and one of those questions is, how many loggers do I need? There's no simple answer. There's no one-to-one correlation. I can't tell you exactly a number for you. I can take two completely identical buildings built right next to each other and just store different collection in those facilities with different staff. And it all comes down to, what do the staff need to know? Are there important collections in those facilities that they want to monitor? Then they would want to keep loggers with the collection. Has the space had environmental problems? Is there mold within the space? You want to keep a logger near where the mold may have been found. Have you had a space that just the humidity seems a little bit, higher in one room than another? We'll keep a logger in that room. Do you have high shelving and you're afraid of vertical stratification? Then you can keep a logger on the low shelf, in the middle shelf, and the high shelf to look for these things, maybe even find possible microclimates. If you want to do one thing people have asked, can we do a site survey and log in multiple storage areas and find out which storage area is best? That's an idea as well. You can also use them to locate which air handling system may serve a space. One thing I've told people, I've seen one air handler serve one space, one air handler serve multiple floors, and multiple air handlers serve one floor. So if you have a room, and I've seen one room served by 3 air handlers, it's good to get an idea of what's being sent to what floor, what space. So in the summary of that, it's you really want to monitor for what you need to know, what you're looking for. So before I actually jump to the next slide, which is I'm going to actually play a game briefly with everybody. The next slide is a picture I took on vacation. My wife and I went on a trip, and while we were out, there was a display set up of some artifacts pertaining to his slavery in absolutely beautiful cases. They almost spared no expense when they built these cases, and they were excellent. And then I realized that they were logging in the space, and having done this job, it was the first thing to jump straight out at me. So I'm going to bring that picture up. I will say I've cropped the photograph to save the innocent, but here is a picture of the case, and somewhere in this case they're actually logging, and I'm going to eliminate this because that's everyone's first guess, but somewhere in this case is the data logger. And when we looked at this, I actually asked someone, I asked someone in there, so you're actually logging? And they pull data out of here every 2 days or so to check how the collection's handling the conditions. So my answer is, for those of you who haven't found it, it's actually right here. What could be the worst possible location for the data logger in the case. The collection was elevated on a platform, and the logger is actually tucked somewhat underneath it, and it's right next to the light. So it's not experiencing exactly what the collection itself would be experiencing. Which brings me to our logger placement. When placing your loggers, here's a few ideas. You want to keep them near your collection, which is generally 4 to 6 feet from the floor, or within a display case if that's where your collection lies. You want to keep them away from supply ducts, from windows, from any form of heat source. We were actually working on a site a few months ago, and the person contacted us before we left and said, hey, before you go, I want you to look at a logger when you're here. It doesn't seem to give the right temperature. It's always hotter than the rest of the space. And when we were on site, we looked at this logger, and it was sitting in a windowsill on top of the perimeter heat. So no matter what time of year it was, that logger was always giving a false indication, whether it be heat from the window or the heat from the perimeter heat, of what was actually going on within the space. So another thing, you want to keep it wherever there is reason to believe conditions may differ within a space. Again, I said earlier, if you think the relative humidity may be high in a space, or you think the temperature may be high, it doesn't hurt to keep a logger there to check. When to collect your data, this is my last great question on, how often should I collect my data? We have people who collect it weekly, collect it monthly. Some people have contacted me, they have interns on hand who will collect data every day. I don't know of a logger that will punish you for over collecting your data. I haven't heard of one. It doesn't hurt to go out and collect your data as often as you can, but whatever you do, try not to exceed 1 month. You want to make sure that at least once a month you're pulling that data from that logger. And if you live in places prone to storms or high humidity, you might want to pull it a little more often. Or if you have power outages, things like where the HVAC system may have been affected, you might want to pull from those a little more often as well. 2 recommendations I have for people are, 1, setting reminders in your Outlook or your iPad or whatever you use, just to give you that quick reminder, hey, make sure you go and check your data. And if you do use any of the IPI the PEM loggers, which require the thumb drive, keeping that thumb drive attached to the keychain, especially the keychain you would use for the space, is excellent, because you can easily just carry it around with you. If it's the keys you access, you go in, you have the logger in hand, you can quickly pull data from it. One tool we like to tell people we like to use is ourselves, our IR guns. They're excellent for just quick spot checking. If you want to just get a quick, see if a wall may be warmer than somewhere else, or check the temperature of a diffuser, they're excellent to use. They're pretty inexpensive. I think they come about $100. One thing to remember, this is not a sole means of measure. This is just a quick spot check. You don't want to do data collection. Generally, these are not very accurate. The model I have is plus or minus 5 degrees. They're sold by multiple brands, and depending which brand you buy, again, that accuracy changes. I know the one I have, according to the paperwork, is off by plus or minus 5 degrees, but anytime Jeremy or I leave for a project, I test it around a group of loggers just to see what the accuracy is. And I know at this point it's high 1 degree, so I know to subtract 1. But they're definitely useful to have. Just walk around your pocket. If you think a temperature might be high, it doesn't hurt to just take a quick reading. Thermometers are also useful, although I'm not recommending carrying a pocket full of thermometers. It's not very practical. But they're excellent if you have a space that's been troublesome, you can't really afford the logger, you just want to keep an eye on it. It's good to have that thermometer there so you can just keep an eye on the temperature. They're pretty robust. They stand up pretty well to high heat, high humidity. So it doesn't hurt to just keep a thermometer on a space. Your building management system. Building management system is or they call them BMS, but your building management system would be the software that controls your air handling systems. Your air handling systems would be the systems that provide the air throughout your facility. They manage the air, heating, cooling. And not all facilities have a building management system. I've actually been to some that do not have them at all. They're just manually operated. I've seen some sites that have building management systems, and not all systems are on it. So it's a very useful tool. However, you got one thing to keep in mind is they're not everywhere. But the question we do get from those who have them are, can we use our building management system to monitor our facility? And it is a yes and no question, or not to monitor, but to log and monitor data. You can use it, but there's a few things to keep in mind. Exporting data from a building management system can be time-consuming. I know for myself, I actually helped a couple facilities exporting this data. It took me a better part of 2 to 3 days to actually get that data readable for eClimate Notebook. So it was a bit of a challenge, but it can be done. And you also have to make sure your system can trend. Most systems can, but there are a few out there that are not capable of trending data. Security and access can be an issue with these systems as well. I came from a background in facility management, and one thing I can say for sure is that if you having this history, you don't want to give access to anybody. One of my rookie errors, if you will call it that, was to provide access to somebody who, when examining the system, accidentally shut my cooling tower down in the middle of July, which meant I had no way to supply chilled water to the facility, and it was in the middle of a very hot July. It took me 3 days to solve that. So your facilities people may be very apprehensive in providing you access to go into the system. And lastly, your sensors, they may not always be where you want them to be. Occasionally, sensor could be at the opposite side of the room. It's fairly normal. Your building management system was designed to handle the air in the facility, not the collection, and it's designed to do that function. Sorry. A few other important tools. Good things to have on hand are prints. your prints just facility prints or design of how the building was laid out, one thing, it's always good to have a copy of the prints on hand, whether you know where they are, have access to them, or even have digital copies of them. A lot of people say, oh, I know the facility, I'm not worried. Those prints come in very handy. They're useful just to, sometimes you don't know everything in that building, and it's good to double check what you may not know. Your HVAC, your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning drawings themselves. One thing I recommend, every job I walk on, every project we walk on, the first time we walk in to see the air handling systems, we actually sit down and do a hand drawing. They're not great. I'm not trying to, be the next Walt Disney. They're just a simple line sketch of how the system operates. It helps you understand the moving parts of the system. What controls what, how, what's the order of this system, and how it all works together. And if anyone has any questions, if you want to see these drawings, I mean, they're not spectacular, just basic line arts. I'll be more than happy. Just contact me after the webinar. I'll be more than happy to send you an image of what we do if you want to try and make your own. And sit down with your facilities person and say, hey, explain to me how it works, and just do a quick sketch of your own system that way. The HVAC schedule, in the world of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, that has two meanings. The schedule I'm talking about in here is the actual operational schedule. When does the unit work? Are there setbacks? What settings are for the unit? Things like that. Your zone maps. Earlier I brought up, I've seen one unit handle multiple floors and one floor served by multiple units. It's good to get an idea of what air handling system serves what space. So if you ever have a question, if you have a space that might not be operating right, it's good to know, because if two rooms are served by the same air handling system and that system goes down, it gives you an idea of where to look, what other spaces may have issues. And again, your facilities person can help you create this, or it's something you might be able to locate on the graphs, which I'll show how we decipher that from a graph coming up. Camera. Film is free. There is no, with film and data storage coming easier and easier to come by, there's no reason why we can't take as many pictures as possible of your systems, of any issues you may have in the space. If you have mold, take as many pictures as possible. It can only help you more. If you wind up getting pictures of mold and then 2 years down the road you get a job elsewhere or leave, or there's an intern that finds it, they're not really sure if it's happened before, you have the images to fall back on. You can look and say, hey, yeah, this has happened before, and you can find out exactly where you may know if you have a bigger problem. Your management team, Jeremy and Jim cover a little bit more later on creating a management team, but one thing is it's not a one-man approach. Not one person can do this alone. Knowing the facilities, collections, machinery, psychrometrics, mechanical system, maintenance, it's too much for one person to master alone. You want to have a good cross-discipline, a facilities person, collections, preservation person, administration, just to get a good broad understanding, multiple heads in the room to help try and figure out any issues that may be occurring. Dew point calculator is an extra tool we offer from IPI. It's completely free. It's at dpcalc.org. It's a good tool to use. It gives relations for temperature, relative humidity, dew point, and helps you kind of toy with different settings and what the metrics may be for those conditions. And last but not least, questions. Don't mean sending your questions right now, although you can if you have any. But questions just in general towards your systems. If it doesn't hurt for you to ask, what does this do? Can this do better? What are these limits? Even walking up to your facilities person and saying, hey, what's outside air? With regard to an air handling system, what's outside air? What is the cooling coil? What's it look like? You can only learn more about the system, and it helps you make better decisions. If you continue to be a person that requests a cooler condition that the system just can't provide, asking those questions may help clarify, hey, you know what, maybe my system really isn't capable of this, and it just helps you make a more informed decision. Data gathering is important to learn what your collection is feeling. Logging data is important to get to know your air handling systems, to know what your space is doing in general, and to identify and anticipate any problems and make any necessary adjustments you need. It also allows you to document conditions and make changes to your system to determine what may be safer. So analyzing your environment is going to answer for you. The main question is, what is your data for specifically? You want to paint a picture of what your collection is experiencing. A lot of time functions have been placed on facilities that they weren't intended to be used as. In the time I've been with IPI, I have found or talked to or seen museums or libraries that were a museum that was once a library was once a museum, and museums that were once skating rinks, car dealerships, airplane hangars. It's an incredible list of functions that the facility was never intended to be used for. I've also seen purpose-built buildings, a purpose-built library where the janitorial closet was changed to an incunables collection. And even simply with staff changes, if a facilities person has worked there for 20 years and retires, the next incoming facilities person may decide, hey, I'm going to make some adjustments, save a little bit of energy, changes your environment as well. So as your environment changes, or as the function of the building changes, you want to know what your collection is experiencing. And answers to these questions, are my materials in the right space? You want to evaluate and analyze locations around your facility. What is the right location in my building? You want to evaluate how your air handling systems handle your seasons. You want to evaluate how the systems work. Are my units cycling? And it's not only about document what may be wrong with your system, but good monitoring can also show you what you're doing right. Are you getting your money's worth for the system you have? Did you install a new cooling coil within your system, and you're not getting your money's worth for that? Or are you getting your money's worth for that? It quantifies the preservation quality of the storage environment, and it can be used to document the value of any improvements you've made. Analysis of environmental data. If you use the data properly, you're going to find a few answers to some questions. And a good majority of these I'll go through in a second while I go through the graphs. Question of which systems serve the space. You'll be able to locate periods of humidification, dehumidification. You'll find setbacks and lighting schedules, how they affect the conditions. You'll identify seasonal trends and even identify malfunctions of equipment. Going to jump to our first slide of data analysis, which system serves a space. If you're looking at this graph, there are 3 loggers within this space. There's the Fine Art Stacks East, a Fine Art Stacks North, and the Fine Art Office. If you look at the green and the blue, the Fine Art East and North, and if you look at them on the graph, they tend to follow each other fairly closely on this graph, and we call that the dew point signature for a unit, or air handling unit signature for a unit. So we'll get an idea of, looking at that, well, more than likely those 2 units or those 2 spaces are served by the same unit. If you look at the gold unit, the Fine Art Office, while it's similar, it's different enough where will let us know that's more than likely served by a different air handling unit. So if you look at these graphs, you see these 2 very tight on dew point, then again, it's more than likely the same, and if it's off quite dramatically, it's more than likely a different unit serving that space. How to find out if your system humidifies or dehumidifies the air within your space. If you're comparing indoor to outdoor data, here you have a historic house and the outside air for Chatham, Massachusetts. If you look at the 2, this is the dew point. If you're looking at the dew point in the summertime, they follow each other, they mimic each other perfectly. So it's clear to see there that there's no moisture control at all. And the same going into the winter months. If you see that they're still fairly close, maybe a little slight buffering between either the heating system or the house, but they follow each other close enough to know that it's not, more than likely no moisture control being performed in the wintertime as well. However, if you look at a graph like this, here you have Washington, D.C. in a museum B09 North room. Here you see the outside air, the gold, with the dew point curve on the curve of the dew point from January to January. So you got a full year there. And you notice that the dew point here is a little higher, which shows us that at this point in time, from January to, unfortunately it's covered up, but it would probably be maybe late March or April, the system would be adding or humidifying the space. And then we have what they call a shoulder season, which is a time when less humidity would be used in the air. It's in between the heating or the humidification and the dehumidification season. And then as you come to the next rise here, you see the outside dew point raised, but then there's what they call a ceiling on the dew point here. That's a sign that we're actually dehumidifying the air for that space. So you have your humidification in the wintertime, your shoulder season here, and then your dehumidification. Now, when you look at the next coming fall/winter, you have your shoulder season. But if you look at this compared to the previous year, it's a little higher. It's a little closer to what the spring dew point was, or the summer dew point was. That may be a sign that someone's altered the set points for the unit. They're running, they're adding more moisture. They're doing more moisture control added to the air. So you see it's a little higher than the previous year before. Now, this is a little bit tighter of a dew point. This is 50, or this dew point here shows us there's a little bit more tighter control of relative humidity and temperature for this space. If you look, there's a very steady humidification control, and you have again your shoulder season in here, and then your dehumidification is not very far off from your humidification. This runs here late May to mid-September. Again, your shoulder season and dehumidification. This is a very tight relative humidity control, and it's one of the setups that is for a specific function. They're going to be using these to really keep the moisture under control within this space. So one way to look at a malfunction. So if we're looking to this, if you're looking at this graph, same as before, I've showed you a graph where we have humidification, and this is a room and Washington, D outside air. So if you look, you have the humidification here as well. And then once again, the shoulder season where it's applying less moisture control of the space. And then you have your dehumidification. But after that, unlike the previous graph where I showed where this would continue on, you actually notice that it drops off. So there you see there was an influence. There was maybe a system malfunction or whatever causing there's no humidity being added to this air at this point. So again, it could be a system malfunction, could be the humidification wasn't turned on, a variety of reasons. But you do see, according to this graph, and actually a better one, if you look at it here, this is another example of a malfunction within a system. Here you have the winter of 2009, and you see it's a very tight relative humidity going into the summer season, and then the next coming winter for 2010, there's a solid drop. And that would show us the system is not operating. The system obviously is just going with the outdoor dew point. It's a sign that the system may have failed or isn't working. And in reality, the system did quit working. It was a problem with the system. They were able to bring it back on and operate it manually, which are the bumps you see here is turned out to be the manual on-off to keep the humidity under or to have some form of humidity control in the space. And then you go back into the spring season here, you go back to spring and summer here, and if we had a wider graph to show the following year, it actually was back around normal, which would be the 2009. One last humidity graph is this one. Actually, if you see a graph, if you ever looked at a humidity graph and you see it's down in the low 20s, that could be a fair indication that there's a desiccant dehumidifier. And a desiccant dehumidifier is a large, one of the most popular kinds. Is a large wheel that spins with material that will absorb moisture from the air and will helps lower you get a lower dew point with a desiccant dehumidifier than you do with standard cooling coils or other forms of dehumidification. But if you look at this graph, it's again an example of both humidification and dehumidification, but it's under very tight conditions. Here you have that desiccant dehumidifier operating down the mid-20s or low 20s. And you could actually see here this little hiccup, if you want to call it that, was where the changeover from the heating to the cooling season, or the humidification to the dehumidification. And with that hiccup, that changeover there, you then see that you're in the winter months, and this is where the unit would be adding humidity to the air. So seeing that, you get an idea of what levels of moisture control you have in that space, what's actually happening at that time. One of the things I discussed earlier in the presentation was being able to see occupancy in a graph. When you see a sawtooth graph similar to this, it's actually a pretty fair sign of occupancy's influence. If you were looking at this graph, I like to use this section right about here. It's a great example of the occupancy, and you see it goes up about 3 degrees over the period of a week. If you look at this graph, this starts Monday. This section right here ends on Sunday. And you could see coming into Sunday when the museum's closed, museum opens Monday, closes Monday night, opens Tuesday, closes Tuesday, opens Wednesday, closes Thursday. We're on Thursday there, Thursday to Friday, Friday to Saturday, and again Sunday when the museum closes. So it gives you an idea of exactly how the occupancy can influence. Granted, it's only 3 degrees. I have seen a space where the daily fluctuations are roughly 4 to 5 degrees. But this gives a fair indication of how that occupancy can act as a factor. Data analysis for equipment malfunctions. One of the first things Jim and Jeremy had me do when I started at IPI was pour through a series of graphs and try and decipher the difference between an equipment malfunction and a set point change. And there's a difference in the two, and at times if you don't know exactly how to determine which one from the other, you can confuse the two. But one way to notice an equipment malfunction is an equipment malfunction will at times look like this. More than likely, if you see an equipment malfunction on a graph, you'll be coming along. This is on temperature, and then you see it just rise up slowly over a period of about maybe a week and a half. Here it looks like. So this climb is maybe over a week, and then levels off, and then you see it come back down after more than likely the equipment was fixed, brought back to normal, and it comes back down to where it should be. So this is one way. When you see this, can be a sign that you have an equipment malfunction, that something's not operating properly. A set point change will actually be a straight shot up. I call them cliffs when I see them, because that's to me what it looks like. It looks like a far shot of a cliff. You'll see that straight shot up and a little plateau. If you're looking at this graph, you can see that they were coming along. They're roughly about 66 degrees, and they decided to raise the temperature mid-October, and they raised it. This is the great thing about data collection and actually analyzing, monitoring your data, because you're able to see firsthand, am I doing better for my change? Am I doing better for my collection with my change? And here they made their change over a few weeks, realized, you know what, it's not great. We could have done better. We're not happy. It's not providing the best environment. You can actually see that they bumped it back down. You see it fall back off on the tail end there and level out. So, they made the change. It wasn't working. They brought it back down. And here in the graph, you're able to see how that actually would show up. So identifying heat and moisture loads within a space. All three of these locations here are one room that are served by the same air handling unit. And it's a large collection of camping materials. And it's about 2,000 square feet in this space. And there's the 3 loggers. The blue logger, which is actually up in the front area of the collection. The red logger is more towards the rear of the collection, and the green, which is the mammal's case, is about back of the collection, about 50 feet away from the red logger. Now, first, when you look at this, your first thing that'll catch your eye is blue and the red. Well, that's the same system, but they're maybe about, at times, 5% apart in relative humidity. Well, you examine the space and you find, well, next to the cabin, next to the blue logger, there is a fake or faux stream that was installed just to kind of add ambiance to the whole camping aura. And that stream's adding that little bit of moisture into the air in the space. So knowing that, we know, okay, well, that's why these two follow each other but aren't exact. But if you look at the green logger, you notice it's kind of a constant across the board, goes up a little bit, and they've actually had mold occur in this space. Mold's been an issue within that case. It's actually a wooden case built into the wall, and it has taxidermy samples in there, and they've constantly, it's a cleanup of mold. There's a kind of a mildewy smell within the case. So we begin to look around as to what could be causing that, and we find out that there's belief that a stream runs underneath the museum. And lo and behold, after some fishing around the facility, Jeremy and I were able to find a hatch, opened it up, and there was a rainbow of all different kinds of colors of samples of mold, if you will, green and black and white and all fancy colors. And the stream runs almost under that case, and that case was acting as a trap enough to contain the moisture, hold it in there, and with the temperatures the system was providing, cause mold or allowing mold to grow. So that just that one stream, the moisture coming up through the foundation, was causing this little line right there. You can never have too much data. It's impossible. The more data you have, the more opportunity you're going to have to learn from it. I've said it before, Jim and Jeremy and I we can never tell you have too much. Data, again, is going to allow you, if you have it and you do the right examination of data, you're going to learn things you didn't know were possible, you didn't know were actually going on within your space. A few thoughts, just going back on some things we brought up. Data collection is the first step towards improving your environment for collection preservation. Again, you cannot manage what you do not measure. One logger arbitrarily placed is not a monitoring program. Please don't be that person just sticking a single logger in there and not having a plan. You bought it because you were told to. You want to have a plan going forward. You want to work to help your collection. You want at least that 1 year's worth of data. You want to make sure you're getting an accurate TWPI for your space, and you want to make sure you're pulling data from your loggers at least once a month. You want to at least make sure you're hitting those loggers once a month. Remember, logger accuracy and battery life are extremely important. When you're looking at loggers, you want to make sure you're getting that at least a 1 year's worth of battery life, and you want to make sure, check the logger accuracy. Make sure you're not getting a logger that's, I've seen incredibly cheap ones that are off by 5 degrees plus or minus. You want to make sure you kind of avoid those. You want to stay with ones that are accurate and have that decent battery life. And remember, no finger pointing. I tossed it in there just to make sure, when you work in these groups, when you have a team that you're working with, a management team, the thing that's going to cause that team to fall apart before anything is, I asked for this, he didn't do this, I wanted that, they didn't do this. We said this. You want to work as cohesively as possible. You're all working towards the same goal. You all have the same intention in mind. Measure and compare the quality of your environment over time. You want to compare your previous years. Remember, once you start a monitoring program, stick with it. Don't give up. Don't walk away. We now have the knowledge, the tools to determine answers strategically, holistically, and most important, safely for your collection. A preservation environment, the benefits you're going to get from a long-term preservation, the long-term comparative data is you're going to be able to improve the quality of your environment over time. You're going to see, you're going to be able to make those changes to improve your space, You're going to improve the quality of your operation. You know, you may find you can make the system you have run better than it currently is running. And you might be able to find that you can make that system do more. You're going to establish a collection history. You're going to be able to see firsthand, you know, what that collection's experienced. You'll be able to see, you know, have you exposed it to really low humidity at one point in time? Have you exposed it to high temperatures? You'll have that in your history to see, while it's been in your possession, what has it seen? And also it facilitates communication and starts the decision making. You know, you can begin to have those conversations of what you need to do going forward because you have the information you need to make those decisions. A few upcoming webinars. The next one will be dealing with temperatures and moisture extremes. Jeremy will be back in the driver's seat for that one. The others, the equilibrium enclosures, building environment envelopes, and moisture control. The list of this is also on the IPIsustainability.org. So you can go there. Definitely recommend registering for them as early as possible. The next webinar is going to explore dealing with temperature and moisture extremes in your environment, how temperature, relative humidity, and dew point interact, how to deal with temperature extremes, how building envelopes deal with moisture, temperature and moisture control in historic buildings, and energy costs of dealing with excessive moisture via your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. If you'd like to find out more information, the project website, again, the IPIsustainability.org, includes archived workshops, webinar presentations, reference material, videos. If you want to hear this again, if you're looking for this presentation, and if you missed the other two that Jeremy did previously, those are up on IPI Sustainability. This will be up within about 2 or 3 days. The slides will be up there as well. If you just want to look through them again, want to go over some of the material that I had. When this webinar is over, there will be a brief survey that will be emailed to you. Please fill it out. Be as polite to me as possible, but fill the survey out, send it to us. We like to hear any response that you get, and the more of those that we get back, the better. So now is my time to open it up if anyone has any questions. If anyone wants to find out more on anything, I will open the floor. How many samples should be taken per hour? I have one from Sarah McGregor. If you're using a PEM logger, the logger samples every 5 minutes and then averages 6 readings together after 30 minutes. So you have an average for 30 minutes. So it's one reading every 30 minutes, but it's an average of the 6 readings that were taken. Those are the loggers we use. Generally, if Jeremy and I are on site doing a visit, we set our loggers up. I generally try and set them up to stay in about a 30-minute sampling range. Go to what is an air handler from Elizabeth Carlton. Air handler is the system which creates trying to think of the actual technical term I could use. It's the system that's going to create the air within the facility. It's that big unit. You'll see them on top of facilities. You'll see them behind facilities. It's going to be what brings in the outside air. It has heating filters, which are going to filter out any impurities. It has your heating coils, which is going to heat the air if it need to be. Cooling coil, which is going to cool and dehumidify the air if it needs to. It may have humidification in it. Coils are going to add humidity control, moisture control to the air. And a large fan generally designed to push the air downstream. I have some rough prints I could send anyone. Again, if anyone wants to see our sketches we do, just to get an idea of what we, kind of sketches we make while we're on site and see what we use. Any other questions in there? There are formats for climate data. There are standards. There are also other softwares that can read different standards. I have 3 data loggers. I'm reading a question. The formats for climate data, I believe you mean, I'm sorry, Catherine Corman, I believe you mean data from PEM log or data from loggers in general. We use PM files come off our loggers. eClimate Notebook's pretty good at reading most data if you have the basic basic service on. We generally read from hobos or most types of loggers. I've only run into an issue with eClimate Notebook opening loggers from, I think it was a European brand of loggers, and I offhand can't remember the name, but eClimate Notebook should open them. There's multiple different styles. I don't believe there's a standard at all for logger files. Unfortunately, I think everyone uses a little bit different from each other. And again, the eClimate Notebook, you ask, are there software that can read several standards? Usually eClimate Notebook's good at reading most that are out there as long as you have the basic version going forward. I have another question just came in. Have a large historic house room with 18-foot ceilings, 40 by 30 east-west facing windows with a minimum of 3 loggers be advised, if not more, such as 6. This is a tough question. Actually, Alex, I would actually like to see maybe a layout of the room, get so I could actually see it rather than going off here. Historic rooms can be tricky. 18-foot ceilings, it can be a tricky room, and it's hard to say exactly where. I'll contact you afterwards and try and go over that a little bit more to get a better idea of what the space may look like and other ideas you may have for that space. This is the last one. One second, we're just trying to get the next question. That's the last one? We're all done?
There's the one from okay.
Yeah, that's the one. I didn't get that one. All right, sorry. Oh, there we go. Sorry, we're just having an issue getting a question to me. Is getting outdoor air temp from NOAA via eClimate Notebook, is that sufficient for tracking outdoor air? Or should I also get something to keep outside of our building? Well, Don, that's actually a very good question. We have run into place. We did some work with a museum in the Adirondacks. Unfortunately, the outdoor air data we have for them is probably about an hour's drive away. While it's still close, the environment, the landscape there makes it so that an hour's drive is a world difference to their for that space. So despite the fact that the NOAA location was close to them, it wasn't exactly the outdoor air that was coming to them. So in their case, they actually found a safe place, an overhang, where they were able to put a logger where it wouldn't get wet, it wouldn't get it wouldn't get rained on, and wouldn't get any abuse from the direct elements, and keep it out there under the overhang and get a temperature readings off that, get an idea of what's being brought to their immediate location, because unfortunately they were so remote that even the NOAA we had wouldn't directly relate to them. So it doesn't hurt if you feel, we've talked to people, the NOAA station is, again, the closest airport. We've talked to people in cities, and it's only a few miles away, but they would prefer to get exactly what's going on outside. It really doesn't hurt to have the logger there. Or again, I brought up mentioning trending. If you're a building management system, if your facility manager may be able to trend that data, that's something you could use as well if it's possible, and bring that data into eClimate Notebook and see the type of air that your system's actually seeing from outside as well. What your system sees as the outside air relative humidity. Is that all of our questions? Oh, wait. Does NOAA indicate if it has rained? I believe on our site it does not. On any data we have from NOAA, it does not. But I believe if you go to NOAA and break the down per day for the month, I think you could find that. But offhand, I don't know. I know I've looked at NOAA a couple times, and there's ways to tell whether or not whether or not it's rained on that day. But that's really going to know a site and doing a search. I unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to answer that directly. I apologize. Do we have any more questions, or is that end? Appears to be the end of our questions. I hope I was helpful. I hope you learned something. And please join us next time or next month for Jeremy as Jeremy takes the wheel again. And we'll see you all then.